Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
Waldo, brought face to face with the actuality of the unbelievable, as he himself would have worded it, was completely dazed. In silence, he suffered the consul to lead him from the tepid gloom of the interior, through the ruinous doorway, out into the hot, stunning brilliance of the desert landscape. Hassan followed, with never a look behind him. Without any word, he had taken Waldo's gun from his nerveless hand and carried it, with his own and the consul's. The consul strode across the gravelly sand, some 50 paces from the southwest corner of the tomb, to a bit of not wholly ruined wall, from which there was a clear view of the doorway side of the tomb and of the side with the larger crevice. "Hassan," he commanded, "watch here." Hassan said something in Persian. "How many cubs were there?" the consul asked Waldo. Waldo stared, mute. "How many young ones did you see?" the consul asked again. 20 or more, Waldo made answer. "That's impossible," snapped the consul.
How many cubs were there? Did Weird Bear Month go into overtime?
Oh my god.
Or are these young ones of a different sort?
We're gonna find out in this desert adventure called Amina by Edward Lucas White.
My mind kept trying to make this title say anima, which is the Latin for mind or soul, where we get words like animation or reanimator.
Oh, right, yeah.
But no, this is Amina, which is a name of Arabic origin that means honest or faithful. Amina is a character from the Arabian Nights who isn't all that honest about her true nature, and that's the name referenced in this title. We know that H.P. Lovecraft crafted a deep love for the Arabian Nights, and I think likely also read this story, which introduces a key monster from his mythos. Speaking of the mythos, today's reader is the man with the mythos, the ghouliest, the Cthulhuiest, Mr. Andrew Lehman.
Lehman is the best at what he does, and what he does is beautiful. Please head over to the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society for all the best Lovecraftian props, radio dramas, books, apparel, all things Lovecraftiana. Last month at Chaosium Con, they released a new collection of vintage prop maps that are now available on their site. The set includes a map of Arkham, Innsmouth, Dunwich, and Massachusetts as a whole, including those towns.
There's also a gorgeous vintage map of the solar system, the world, U.S. highways as of 1926. That's probably one you're going to want to keep in your glove compartment.
Yeah.
The pyramids at Giza, the Miskatonic Antarctic Expedition, and 2 showing the location of Roulier. That's the address where Cthulhu sleeps.
Oh, yeah.
These guys just doxed Cthulhu.
Oh, no.
That's how fearless they are.
My God.
Go get your hands on these maps.
There's so much good stuff to be had at the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society. It'll freak you out.
I like getting freaked out, which is why I found this story in an anthology I picked up in the hopes of being scared. 101 Chilling Tales, Great Horror Stories from Fall River Press. I will agree that there are 101 stories in the book, but great stories? I'm not so sure. But this one stood out. And when I looked up the author, episodes of our own show came up.
Yeah, that's right. We covered Edward Lucas White with The Snout back in 2013 in episodes 159 and 160. We didn't do much of a bio on those episodes, so let's fix that. Edward Lucas White was born in 1866 in Bergen County, New Jersey. He went to college at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore and lived in Baltimore the rest of his life. White wrote many historical novels, including El Supremo, a romance of the great dictator of Paraguay in 1916, The Unwilling Vestal in 1918, and Helen in 1926.
There is, of course, a luchador called El Supremo, a Mexican wrestler. Actually, El Supremo was unmasked after losing a bout a long time ago. His son wrestles now, El Supremo Jr.
Oh, good. White is really remembered for his spooky, scary stories. He published 2 collections, The Song of the Sirens in 1919 and Lucandu and Other Stories in 1927. His most often anthologized story is Lucandu. It's about an American explorer who pisses off a witch doctor, and oh man, it gets crazy. I read the synopsis to it and wow.
That title sounded familiar to me, and I figured out that it was because it was on our list of stories that were mentioned in Lovecraft's essay Supernatural Horror in Literature. Although we never got around to covering it, maybe it was too long or too something. This is the mention of it from the Weird Tradition in America chapter of that essay. Very notable in their way are some of the weird conceptions of the novelist and short story writer Edward Lucas White, most of whose themes arise from actual dreams. The Song of the Sirens has a very pervasive strangeness, while such things as Look and Do and The Snout rouse darker apprehensions. Mr. White imparts a very peculiar quality to his tales, an oblique sort of glamour, which has its own distinctive type of convincingness. I'm not quite sure what any of that means, but I'm sure we read that bit on our prior coverage of White. I just wanted to include it again as a reaffirmation that Lovecraft was a fan of his.
Yeah.
This story, Amina, is not mentioned in supernatural horror and literature, but it seems like it possibly influenced him.
I think so. White had a big project that he never finished called Plus Ultra, a utopian science fiction novel. It exists as a 500,000-word piece, but it has never been published in its entirety. A part of it was published as a 1920 novella called From Behind the Stars. He died in 1934 at the age of 67, and if you look at pictures of him, he looks kind of like Sigmund Freud.
That was what I thought too. Yes, he definitely does. This story originally saw publication in the June 1907 edition of The Bellman, which I assume is a literary magazine of some sort. In 1927, it was included in the compilation Look and Do and Other Stories. Now, Lovecraft published Pickman's Model later in 1927. So I wondered if maybe he was pulling from the story earlier in the year, although I read that he wrote Pickman's Model in 26, the year prior.
Yeah.
That said, supernatural horror and literature was also published in late 1927, and he's referencing The Snout in that, which is in Look and Do and Other Stories. So he read it that year when it came out, for sure, before either of those things were published. Look, I'm talking about ghouls, folks. We're being coy here. What we think of as Lovecraftian ghouls, they are in this story we're covering today. There's no way I'm not going to mention that in our social media posts about this show, so it's already out there.
Yes.
Got to remind the Lovecraft fans that we still work in this medium. It's not all bears and Draculas, as they say. Sometimes ghouls, too. Why don't we just get into the plot?
The story begins, actually, with the end. Waldo is on a hunting expedition in the desert. The guy in charge of it is just called the consul. A consul is an official appointed by a sovereign state to protect its commercial interest and aid its citizens in a foreign city. They are all at a tomb in the desert, and Waldo is hot, tired, and freaked out by what he has seen. The consul really lays into him in the beginning, and it seems like Waldo messed up somehow. Waldo tells him that there are 16 to 18 of these animal things inside, young ones. The consul tells him that can't be right. There should only be 10. Hassan, a local guy, gives Waldo some water and gives him a gun. Consul tells Waldo to relax and drink. He acknowledges that Waldo had quite an experience, so of course he gives him some brandy. The best thing for dehydration.
This thing has a really effective hook. I made the joke about the consul asking how many cubs there were, which Waldo doesn't respond to, but then he clarifies how many young ones. Right away, as the reader, you're wondering, what kind of young ones? You know, it can't be good, because Waldo is extremely freaked out by whatever they were.
The consul tells Waldo that the plan is to kill these things, and the best way to do that is to smoke them out. The male is gone and won't likely be back before nightfall. The creatures are nocturnal. He sends Hassan back to get fuel, and Waldo has a job to do while they wait.
The consul also refers to them as vermin, reminding me of my favorite ghoul, Vermin from Marvel Comics.
Oh, yeah.
And this job that Waldo has to do, he and the consul are going to do it while Hassan is away. The consul says we must make sure that none escape, which is another great horror convention. Their job is containment. That's always that excellent mission in a monster story. Not only do you have to face the creature in some way, but if any bit of that creature or its children get out, everybody's in trouble. Yeah. So you have to keep it bottled up.
The consul marks off some lines in the sand and tells Waldo that he will only walk between these two lines, and if he sees anything, shoot it. The consul will be on the other side of the tomb doing the same. If Waldo steps out of these lines, the consul is likely to shoot him. So don't step out of line. He stresses to Waldo that these things are really dangerous and we can't fool around. He says this, shoot and shoot to kill. Not only is it our duty, in general, to abolish them, but it will be very dangerous for us if we do not. There is little or no solidarity in the Mohammedan communities, but on the comparatively few points upon which public opinion exists, it acts with amazing promptitude and vigor. One matter as to which there is no disagreement is that it is incumbent upon every man to assist in eradicating these creatures.
Even in a tribal culture,
Yes.
Everybody agrees that this is something that needs to be dealt with.
And if somebody doesn't think you're doing your part in killing these things, they will kill you for not doing your duty. So don't screw this up.
This story falls under the subgenre of Oriental Gothic, the British or American in the otherworldly Middle East or Asian land, learning that there are hideous secrets that the quote-unquote civilized world isn't privy to. This genre was incredibly popular at the time, and it's still popular, actually. I just think that there's been a spin in which the imperialist culture is now shown to also be deficient in many ways, right?
Yeah.
So it's like it used to be more of a white savior narrative, and now it's more of a white needing to be saved by that culture in some ways.
As Waldo waits for Hassan to return, he gets hot and uncomfortable and starts feeling faint, almost trance-like, but eventually Hassan returns and starts up a fire. We don't get a lot of detail on what happens.
Waldo's trance became a nightmare when the smoke took effect and the battle began. He was, however, not only not required to join in the killing, but was enjoined to keep back. He did keep very much in the background, seeing only so much of the slaughter as his curiosity would not let him refrain from viewing. Yet he felt all a murderer as he gazed at the 10 small carcasses laid out in a row, and the memory of his vigil and its end, indeed of the whole day, though it was the day of his most marvelous adventure, remains to him as the broken recollections of a phantasmagoria.
Yikes, 10 small carcasses.
Ooh.
I guess Waldo's original estimate of 20 was way off, but that guess that there was double of what he actually witnessed tells you what kind of impression it left on him.
Yeah.
But it was so horrific, he just imagined there were so many more young ones, as has been said so far.
We go back in time to the morning to get this backstory. Waldo wakes up before everybody else in the camp. From a description of their travels, we get a sense that they're somewhere near Basra, Iraq. Waldo is from New England.
He's not only from New England, he's also from Rhode Island. This is something else that I think Lovecraft might have stolen from this story, being from Rhode Island. Possibly. But he's already had quite an adventure at this point. The experiences of his sea voyage, the sights at Gibraltar, at Port Said, in the canal, at Suez, and at Basra had formed an altogether inadequate transition from the regularity of house and school life in New England to the breathless wonder of the desert immensities.
He sees that the consul is still asleep, and we discover that this guy is a combination sportsman, explorer, and archaeologist. Waldo thought the guy would be pretty chill, but he runs a tight ship and he has some hard rules.
Right away, I'm not liking Waldo. He's the guy that taps on the glass at the zoo, even though they asked him not to do it. Rules don't apply to him. He feels stifled by them, in fact, and said he had looked forward to absolutely untrammeled liberty and the spacious expanse of the limitless wastes. The reality he had found exactly the reverse of his preconceptions. And that's because of this consul guy who knows what he's doing, clearly.
The consul says, "Never let yourself get out of sight of me or Hassan unless he or I send you off with Ali or Ibrahim. Let nothing tempt you to roam about alone. Even a ramble is dangerous. You might lose sight of the camp before you know it." Waldo says he knows his way around wilderness navigation, but the consul says, "You don't have cords in the main woods." Kurds is an antiquated name for the Kurds of northern Iraq.
He said that because Waldo's bragging about never having lost his way in the Maine woods, which is a funny comparison. The Maine woods are vast, but we're talking about the desert, which is an entirely different ecosystem and environment.
As they traveled, their expedition met some friendly Kurds. Waldo knew a bit of the different Persian dialects and could understand some of what they were saying. Hassan asked the Kurds if they had seen any of them around and if any had been killed, but what they were was a mystery to him. When they were traveling, Waldo asked Hassan why the consul was being so strict.
Hassan spoke some English and regaled him with tales of afrits, ghouls, specters, and other uncanny legendary presences, of the jinn of the waste, appearing in human shape, talking all languages, ever on the alert to ensnare infidels, of the women whose feet turned the wrong way at the ankles, luring the unwary to a pool and there drowning her victims, of the malignant ghosts of dead brigands more terrible than their living fellows, of the spirit in the shape of a wild ass or of a gazelle, enticing its pursuers to the brink of a precipice and itself seeming to run ahead upon an expanse of sand, a mere mirage, dissolving as the victim passed the brink and fell to death, or the sprite in the semblance of a hare feigning a limp, or of a ground bird feigning a broken wing, drawing its pursuer after it till he met death in an unseen pit or well shaft.
The feet turned the wrong way at the ankles is such a disturbing image for some reason.
It is.
But they're all doing the same thing, which is luring somebody on to their demise.
Yes, yeah.
But because these warnings all sound like they come from the Arabian Nights, Waldo is not really buying it. Says these childish bogey tales merely whetted Waldo's craving for independence. So it's having the opposite effect, these scares.
Now we're back again to the morning, and Waldo, waiting for everybody to wake up, is bored. Everybody's asleep, so he's really sure he knows his way around, and he's not going to get lost. So he sets off to have a look around. Hours later, Waldo is lost. He finds himself on a large stone in the shadow of a ruined tomb. He's brought a gun. That's good. But he forgot his water. What?
Of the things that you shouldn't forget in the desert, water, man.
Come on.
But he was just so confident that he was just going to have a little walk around and come back that he didn't even bother. This guy is less of the imperialist savior character and more of the dumb tourist character, really. I love this. It seemed to him that the consul was merely innately cautious, overcautious. There was no danger. He would have a fine leisurely stroll, kill something perhaps, and certainly be back in camp before the sun grew hot. But immediately, of course, he gets lost out in the desert, which is full of remains of ancient tombs. Nothing foreboding about that.
These tombs were once near villages and civilization, but over time the villages were abandoned and the homes were lost to time. The tombs were built to last, so they're the only things that remain of the people that once lived there. As the sun goes higher, the shadows grow shorter, and Waldo gets hotter and thirstier. Then, out of the blue, a woman walks around the side of the tomb. Unlike most women in the region, she wears no facial covering and is barefoot on the hot sand. Also, her clothes hang on her like a sack, showing no waistline. They both stare at each other, a bit surprised. Waldo notices that she doesn't wear any jewelry and that her finger and toenails are long and sharp. She smiles at him, but doesn't show any teeth.
This all checks out.
Strangely, she speaks English. He asks her how she knows English so well, not what the hell are you doing out in the middle of the desert? No, he doesn't ask that. It's like,
no,
you know English really well. She explains that she went to a mission school. Waldo tells her that he's lost, but she says that she saw his camp and knows where it is. He's very, very thirsty and doesn't think that he's going to make it back to the camp. She says that her place is nearby and she's got some goat's milk.
And what's more thirst quenching than goat's milk? Give me some of that Gatorade.
When she speaks, it's kind of a growling drone and she barely opens her mouth. As she guides him to her place, he keeps his gun close because he can sense something strange about all of this.
Said so. That's like getting hit in the face and saying, I sense you're angry. But really, he does have no other choice. He's lost.
And really thirsty. He notices that her body seems muscular and lithe from the back, but her front is somehow masked by the hang of her garments. So there's something odd about her body, but he can't quite figure out what it is. He asks if she's Christian, and she says no. So she must be Muslim, and she says no. She is of the Free Folk. What's the Free Folk? Asks Waldo. She doesn't answer. He asks her her name, and she says, Amina. And he remarks, Amina was from Arabian Nights. And she says, from the foolish tales of the believers, she sneered. The Free Folk know nothing of such follies.
If somebody gets angry about Dracula, oh, that's full of lies. They're a vampire.
They're a vampire, of course.
Same thing here.
The Arabian Nights, better known as 1001 Nights, was compiled at some time during the Islamic Golden Age between the 8th and 13th centuries. It was first translated into English in 1706. It's a collection of Middle Eastern fairy tales linked together with a narrative about a sultan that's going to kill one of his wives, but she keeps telling him stories to prolong her life.
Right.
Amina is the name of the Prophet Muhammad's mother, but it is the name of the character in the story of Sidi Numan. In the story, Sidi Numan marries Amina, but she only eats a couple of grains of rice each night. And he knows she's up to something, so he follows her at night when she leaves the house and finds that she sneaks out and goes to a cemetery to hang out with a ghoul. And then she digs up a body and eats it. And that's just the beginning of the story.
Oh, right. It goes to some crazy places after that, right?
Yeah.
Because she's a sorceress, I believe, in that story. She's not a ghoul, necessarily. This story is also based on another tale from the Arabian Nights called The King's Son and the She-Ghoul. So the title's kind of telling you what's up there. In short, I'll tell you that story. I'm getting this summary from TV tropes.
Okay.
Strangely.
Yeah.
Where all the stuff is summarized quite well. In The King's Son and the She-Ghoul, there was once a prince of Persia who enjoyed hunting. On these outings, he was accompanied by the vizier to ensure his safety, just like our consul here. One day, the vizier urges him to make a game of a fleeing animal, and the prince does so. he both loses track of it and the way back home. As he wanders around, he comes across a woman who introduces herself as a princess from India. She was out horse riding when she fell asleep and off her horse, becoming just as lost as the prince before her. Taking pity, he helps her up on his horse so that they can both search for a way home. At some ruins, much like our scene here, the princess asks for a moment to relieve herself. When she's out of sight, the prince goes after her and discovers that he's been deceived. She is not an Indian princess, but a ghoul with multiple children, to whom she announces that she's brought a fat boy for dinner.
Oh, man.
The prince returns to his horse, and when the ghoul comes back outside, she notices he's upset and asks him about it. The prince answers he's being deceived without accusing the ghoul directly, prompting her to reply that he should ask Allah for protection. Taking the advice, the prince asks for protection from his enemies, which makes the ghoul back off. Why did she give him that advice?
I don't know, yeah.
The prince leaves and finds his way home eventually. He relays his peril to his father and blames the vizier for all of it. The king has the vizier executed.
Oh, man.
So we're not going to have that same outcome for the competent person in this story, but pretty much the story is a takeoff of that, combined with the name from the other one. Obviously, ghouls had been around for quite a while before the story. They probably weren't as familiar to American readers, which is the key thing that White is doing here, bringing this into the consciousness of the American pulp reader.
Back to the story, Waldo comments on her strange way of talking, and she says that English is not her first language. Amina takes him to another tomb, and he's a bit surprised that's where she lives. Inside, it's dark, but the floor is very well kept. Just as Waldo's eyes adjust to the light, he sees they are not alone.
When his sight cleared, he looked about, and marked opposite the door the ragged hole which laid open the desecrated mausoleum. As his eyes grew accustomed to the dimness, he was so startled that he stood up. It seemed to him that from its four corners the room swarmed with naked children. To his inexperienced conjecture, they seemed about 2 years old, but they moved with the assurance of boys of 8 or 10.
Oh, that is creepy. You know, if kids are little, like little toddlers, because that's what a 2-year-old is, they look like a toddler, but they move with confidence and coordination like an older kid. That is unsettling.
They should be clumsy by our mammalian calculations, and they're not.
Waldo asks who the kids belong to, and Amina says they're hers. And he's like, they can't all be yours. They're close to the same age. And she just laughs at that.
The children circulated around him, chattering, laughing, giggling, snickering, making noises indicative of glee. So they're loving this too.
Waldo, of course, is freaked out, but he's so thirsty that he keeps asking Amina for water.
The children pranced about him, jabbering strange guttural noises, licking their lips, pointing at him, their eyes fixed on him, with now and then a glance at their mother. They're getting ready to eat, man.
Oh, yeah. And he keeps asking for water, but she just tells him to be patient and gets closer to him. It looks like it's the end for Waldo.
At that instant, 2 rifle shots rang out almost as one. The woman fell face downward on the floor. The babies shrieked in a shrill chorus. Then she leapt up from all fours with an explosive suddenness, staggered in a hurled, lurching rush towards the hole in the wall, and with a frightful yell threw up her arms and whirled backward to the ground, doubled and contorted like a dying fish, stiffened, shuddered, and was still. Waldo, his horrified eyes fixed on her face, even in his amazement noted that her lips did not open. The children, squealing faint cries of dismay, scrambled through the hole in the inner wall, vanishing into the inky void beyond. The last had hardly gone when the consul appeared in the doorway, his smoking gun in his hand. "Not a second too soon, my boy," he ejaculated. "She was just going to spring."
Ho, ho, ho.
Saved at the last minute.
Yeah.
Waldo's like one of those people who tries to get a selfie hanging from a tall building.
Oh, God.
I kind of wanted those ghoul kids to eat up on him, I have to admit.
Yeah, he did have it coming, but...
I've done dumb stuff too, though, so...
Yeah, the ghouls are obviously monsters and they were going to kill him and eat him.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, ghouls got to eat.
If you accept them in the ecosystem, they clearly don't in this part of the world, though.
No, they don't. The council is surprised that he took her down with 2 shots. It usually takes 3 or 4. Waldo, the dummy, still doesn't understand what's going on. He asks the council why he murdered the woman, and the council points out her creepy teeth.
He knelt down and pulled open the full, closed lips, disclosing not human teeth, but small incisors, cusped grinders, wide-spaced, and long, keen, overlapping canines, like those of a greyhound, a fierce, deadly, carnivorous dentition, menacing and combative. I count at least 3 band names in that excerpt. Carnivorous dentition.
Overlapping canines.
Cusped grinders. I will see all of those bands on the same bill. Thank you.
Waldo, still not getting it, says you just can't kill a woman because she's got messed up teeth. The council is stumped by Waldo's blindness. So it's time for the final reveal.
He stripped the clothing from the carcass. Waldo sickened all over. What he saw was not the front of a woman, but the body of a female animal, old and flaccid, mother of a pack. What kind of a creature is it? He asked faintly. A ghoul, my boy. The consul answered solemnly, almost in a whisper. I thought they did not exist, Waldo babbled. I thought they were mythical. I thought there were none. I can very well believe that there are none in Rhode Island, the consul said gravely. This is in Persia, and Persia is in Asia.
Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. It's kind of a similar statement to that. This is just the way things go around here. What did you make of this ending?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. That he's just saying, look, when you're out here, the rules are different. It's a different world, and you gotta accept that. And if you're gonna survive, you gotta listen to me, because I know what it's like here.
This kind of reminded me of my D&D game that I was playing last year, when we came across a goblin orphanage or something like that, and one of the party members was like, let's just kill all these children. And everybody was kind of horrified, and he was like, what? When they grow up, you're gonna kill all of them, if they grow up, right?
Yeah.
They're either other or they're not. And it was sort of like, oh gosh, that's true. Like we said in this culture, no, these are vermin. This is an infestation. They're not supposed to be here. These are like when we accidentally get the wrong insect, the wrong fish, the wrong plant type. In an ecosystem that doesn't support it, it throws everything off. And for some reason, these ghouls are doing that as well. All the tribes agree.
And I wonder if she was lying about her education, or she passed as human when she was young, and then as she got older, she became more ghoul-like. So did you? Because she knew English, supposedly, but one of the things that Hassan said earlier was that some of the jinn knew all languages. That was like one of the powers of the creatures that lived on. So was she just lying and said that she learned English from those people but knew it magically or intuitively? Or was she somebody that did grow up with humans and grew up as human and then went out and developed into a ghoul or became a ghoul? We don't really have any understanding of the ecology of these things or how they work, if it's like Lovecraftian ghouls, where the more you hang out with them, then you start becoming a ghoul, or is it something you're born as?
Well, that's a good question, actually, because if they are this pest here, then they clearly aren't just magical creatures, right? They are an animal that's causing problems. But I would be more tempted, especially because the stories that were being told were about these fairy-like creatures that were luring people to their death and then disappearing, maybe, that she knows English because she's like that. She's like La Belle Dame Sans Merci. She's there to attract you into the lair where you're going to get eaten. But it's a very base animal thing that's going to happen at that point. She's feeding her young. Yeah. So that's very non-magical creature-like.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, not very much, but I mean, it's a combination, And then obviously Lovecraft built on it.
You're talking about D&D and about the idea of evil races. In those stories, they are fantastic creatures. There is, like in Tolkien, a good and an evil.
Right.
There's no kind of in-between with it. There's evil, the darkness, and then there's the good. And the orcs were twisted, malign, evil creatures, even though not really sure exactly in Tolkien where they came from. I know in the movies, Christopher Lee says that they were once elves, but that's not necessarily true in the mythology of it. My youngest son's reading Lord of the Rings, so I've been dipping into the wikis because he keeps asking me questions that I don't know, and I never read the Silmarillion because, it's hard to deal with. Talking with him about it, he goes, so are they all evil, or are there good orcs? And I was like, well, in Tolkien, there seems to be no good orc. That is something that doesn't exist. They are corrupted by the darkness, and that's why they are the way that they are, and there's no salvation. I mean, maybe you could write a story about an orc that's saved. So I wonder if that's how it is with these creatures, that they are just by their very nature of evil, or if they are misunderstood and they're maligned because they are other.
It's an interesting thing that's being examined here, because yes, of course, you worry about an outbreak of something because it might change your culture. I think that that's what people wrestle with in the modern era, where they go, there's these immigrants that are showing up, and then their traditions are going to get worked in, and then I won't even recognize where I live anymore, so I have a fear of that. And a lot of horror stories can reflect, like a lot of Lovecraft stories can reflect that kind of xenophobia. But there's also something where good and evil doesn't necessarily come into it, and it's just survival.
Right.
If we have an outbreak of a disease, it needs to be contained before it kills everybody.
Right.
And the way that this is treated, it's the same kind of thing. Like, no, you got to get every last one of those kids because this needs to be contained. The implication being that they could wipe us out because they eat everything.
Yeah, they eat people.
They
definitely eat people.
And these ghouls aren't necessarily, now we don't know, but I don't think the ghoul prior to Lovecraft was necessarily after dead folks either. They're going to eat you up alive, just like they were luring this Waldo in there to do that. More from TV tropes. It says, before Amina, though published a year after the short story, White wrote a poem titled The Ghula. Rather than a Persian prince who survives his encounter with the ghouls, the poem features an Englishman who gets eaten. Another rewrite of the King's Son and the she-ghoul. Now, on the story of City Newman, although obscure today, it's often omitted from Arabian Nights compilations.
Yes.
It had a significant presence in Western popular culture up until the early 20th century. The focus of this popularity was on the horror aspect of the tale's first half, as the beautiful yet ghastly Amina, through her nightly corpse munching with the ghoul, struck a chord with people. This became a foundational piece in the Oriental Gothic genre, and the critical point of introduction of the ghoul into the West's monster repository. The ghoul itself, as personified by Amina, even though she's not a ghoul herself in the tale, further pushed and influenced the development of vampire and werewolf fiction. In Arabic folklore, ghouls hunt humans by means of violence and trickery in a manner that has them occasionally treated as analogous to ogres. The story of City Newman expressly mentions that ghouls are hunters and excuses the corpse eating as something ghouls do only when circumstances push them to it. But the imagery of the cemetery-dwelling corpse eater stuck with the Western public.
Of course.
Corpse eating is not part of any surviving pre-18th century Arabic folklore regarding the ghoul, and there is anecdotal evidence that hyenas are loosely associated with ghouls in folklore. And hyenas, of course, have had a reputation of being scavengers, so that's where that relation is.
Right.
But they weren't necessarily into human corpses unless they had to be.
Right.
And then Lovecraft said, no, that's exclusively what they want, I think.
I mean, he doesn't really write about them that much. It's pretty much Pickman's model and
Dream Quest.
Pickman's model, the paintings that he's painting are of them eating like babies and stuff. And so they're killing people. They're not eating corpses. They're definitely murderers.
Yeah. So there's an evolution of what this creature is. And even as it's codified in Lovecraft, we still don't really know much about the culture or what they would prefer to be doing.
Yeah.
Interesting stuff. And whether he read this and incorporated it into his work, I don't know.
It's all fascinating, and I love some corpse-eaten monsters.
We're going to get a monster of a different type, although somewhat related to this in terms of trickery.
Yeah.
We've got a story called Love Me Tender that's coming up next. That's a story by Bob Shaw, an author we haven't covered yet. You found that one.
I did, in Ramsey Campbell's New Terrors, Volume 1. New Terrors that came out in 1981. So not so new anymore, really.
New at the time terrors.
Yeah.
We're also going to do The Dark Eidolon by Clark Ashton Smith, which I'm told has some ghouls in it along with tons of other monsters, and that's the kind of thing we want in this Monster Mash month. By the way, folks, this is our free episode for the month of May. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to us on Patreon. That's what keeps the show going. It's what keeps us going. It's what keeps the world going.
Keeps the world going. I want to thank Andrew Lehman for his outstanding reading, as always.
Please check out those prop maps at hplhs.org.
Lastly, I want to thank our stakers, the king of all snakes. Thank you.
I also want to thank Cryptocartographer.
Alistair Brooks. Thank you.
The twins. Thank you so much.
Boss Coffee. Thank you.
Angelina Brown. Thank you.
Eric Gordon, thank you.
Eric S. Vallone, MD, thank you.
I'd like to thank Richard Wolf.
Finally, I'd like to thank Ben A. Those are the folks that make this free show possible. I'm Chad Pfeiffer.
I'm Chris Lackey, and you've been listening to Strange Studies of Strange Stories.
Ghouls, oh no!
Strange Studies of Strange Stories.